right. Hi, class. This is going to be a relatively quick little lecture about a really important concept for our last unit here, which is applying a reading as a lens. And I hope this image is kind of showing you a little bit of what I mean by a lens. A lens is something we look through. I'm wearing some glasses right now, of course, and glasses help me see the world because without the glasses, my vision is a little bit fuzzy. They also kind of limit my field of vision. You know, I see just what's through the lens, and what's on the outside I don't see quite as clearly. And it also brings certain things into focus over others, maybe. And then it's also important to note something kind of obvious, that they're like between me and whatever I'm looking at. The lenses are a separate object that's between me and the things that I'm looking at. So readings can be like a lens in that sense too, because they offer you these tools to help you see better. And like a lens, you're going to look through the reading in order not to just analyze what's in the lens. In fact, sometimes I forget that the lenses are there, but they help me see what's in front of me better. And then because they help me see better, I'm going to be able to write a lot more clearly, and the readings help me do that. I hope this is making some sense, and we're going to get a chance to practice this today. So there's three things I want to highlight that readings have to offer you, and in particular this book that we've started. Key terms, theorists and theories, and binaries. So to start with key terms. Key terms are words or phrases that are essential for the author's argument. It's important that they are essential. That means the argument wouldn't make sense without them. They're really key in that sense. They are necessary. They often are words that repeat in the text. So when you see words start to repeat, that's a really good sign that this is an important key term and you want to make a note of it. And often these are terms that might be common words, or maybe not. They might have invented a certain phrase that other people don't use. That happens sometimes. And the author's probably going to define it in their own special way. So that means that using the dictionary can be helpful, but it's not usually enough to understand the key terms. You're going to need to use context clues from the book as well. And sometimes the book will come right out and define it, and other times it's not so clear. They are not the same as vocab words. So just to give you an example, on page 25 you have the word apartheid. Maybe you've never seen that word before, you don't know what that means, but you'll notice the authors of this book move over it really quickly. It's not central. If you don't understand it, it's fine, and you can look it up if that helps, but it's not central to the argument. And so sometimes it can be hard to understand the distinction between those things, between a keyword and a vocab word. So that can take a little bit of practice. But just know that those two things are different. So some examples we have on page 8, the word civil resistance. And if you look on page 8, it's actually in quotes, so it's pretty sort of clear that this is an important term because we have it in quotes here. And the definition is kind of explained, I would say, over a couple of pages. So it's not a neat definition for you, but it is there in the book. But you're going to have to read a little carefully to find it. Another example that's maybe more obvious, disruption, is on page 45. And again, in this case, it's not always like this, but it says it was what we called disruption. It's not right in quotes, but it kind of says, the words hint to you that this is an important term. And then it defines it right there. The breakdowns that resulted when people defied the rules and institutional routines that ordinarily govern life. Now, it's possible that meaning that they put there is a little complex and hard to kind of understand how you might use that. So in that case, I really recommend defining it in your own words. And in any case, tracking terms as you go, making a note of them on a separate sheet of paper, or just find it with tape flags in your book or something like that, and then defining these terms in your own words so you're sure you understand them. So that's key terms. Next, we have theorists and theories, and this book has some of those too. So what I mean by that, chapter 2, for example, is entirely devoted to two theorists. Theorists are people who have ideas about things, Saul Alinsky and Francis Fox Piven, and their ideas are a little bit different. And so, if as you're reading chapter 2, you can make a chart and take notes to track the differences between the theories of Saul Alinsky versus Francis Fox Piven and see how they compare and contrast. And then that will help you understand these theories. And then you can use those theories in your own writing. Um, there's also sometimes you have theories that aren't attributed to individual theorists. For example, resource mobilization theory is mentioned on page 44. It's not attributed to any individual, but it is a theory that you could apply in your own writing. Okay, finally we have binaries. So binaries are simply opposites. And we use opposites all the time, every day, to organize our thinking. Some very common ones, we've got good and evil, black and white, liberal, conservative. These are binaries. These are sort of opposites that we are very familiar with as a way to kind of understand things. Now, in reality, the world is not a black and white place like this. There's always a lot of zones of gray, and we are often interested in those zones of gray, but nonetheless, we use binaries even when we're talking about how complex things are. Binaries help us organize our thoughts. And so writers use them all the time, and you should use them all the time. And as an example of some binaries in the book, we have on page 11 we have a kind of distinction made between two kinds of nonviolence: principled nonviolence versus tactical nonviolence. Now they're both nonviolence, but they're being proposed as differences, as kind of binaries to each other, opposites in some way. So, how are they different? If you could understand that difference, that might be really helpful to you as you analyze your own social movement that you're going to write about in your research paper. Another example: structure versus mass protest. That's a really important idea in this book, as you'll see. And so you want to understand the difference between those two things. And there's a chapter, in fact, chapter 3 is called The Hybrid. And just a spoiler alert here, the hybrid that they're talking about in chapter 3 is a hybrid between structure and mass protest. So that's interesting, that's a zone of gray. But in order to understand how that hybrid works, we need to understand what each of those things are individually first. And that's how the binaries help us. What makes these two poles different? Understanding those differences will help you understand the ideas better, and then you can use them in your own writing. Okay, I hope this makes some sense. You're going to apply this right away in the discussion post due today. Good luck.